breath hitching in her throat, Penelope stared across the crowded ballroom. Panic paralyzed her. Her abusive ex-husband was walking straight toward her. Desperation took over. Reaching out, her trembling fingers wrapped around the hand of a stranger. Little did she know, she just claimed Chicago's most ruthless crime syndicate boss. Penelope Hayes was not supposed to be at the Drake Hotel tonight. As a senior forensic accountant for a mid-tier firm, her usual Friday night consisted of sweatpants, a mountain of auditing files, and the quiet comfort of her rescue dog, Barnaby. But her best friend and colleague, Sarah Jenkins, had practically dragged her to the annual Gold Coast Charity Gala. "You need to get out, Penny," Sarah had insisted, wrestling a beautiful flowing navy blue chiffon gown over Penelope's head. "It's been 6 months since the divorce. You are beautiful, you are brilliant, and you need to remember what the real world looks like." Penelope knew she was fat. It wasn't a dirty word to her, but for 3 agonizing years, her ex-husband, Dominic Carter, had treated it like a mortal sin. Dominic, a slick corporate venture capitalist, had spent their entire marriage meticulously tearing down her self-esteem. He monitored her meals, made passive-aggressive comments about her curves, and constantly reminded her that a woman of her size should fall to her knees in gratitude for landing a handsome, successful man like him. When she finally found the courage to leave him, after discovering his string of infidelities and the hidden bank accounts he'd been draining, she had taken a piece of herself back. But the psychological scars ran deep. Standing near the ice sculpture, Penelope adjusted the bodice of her dress, feeling hopelessly out of place among the sea of size 0 socialites and men in tailored tuxedos. She took a sip of her champagne, closing her eyes to steady her anxiety. Then she heard it. That distinct, arrogant laugh. Penelope's eyes snapped open. Less than 50 feet away, standing by the VIP tables, was Dominic. He was impeccably dressed, a smug grin plastered on his face as he charmed a group of older investors. Beside him stood a woman who looked like she had walked straight off a runway. Cold sweat broke out across the back of Penelope's neck. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. She couldn't face him. Not tonight. Not when she was finally starting to piece her confidence back together. If Dominic saw her, he would corner her. He would look her up and down, offer that sickeningly sweet smile, and deliver a verbal blow so precise it would shatter her fragile peace. She turned sharply to her right, scanning the room for an exit. The main doors were blocked by a crowd of reporters. The side exit was just past the VIP section, right where Dominic was standing. Panic began to cloud her vision. She took a step back, her heel catching on the edge of the thick carpet. "He's turning around. He's going to see me." In a moment of pure, blind desperation, Penelope lunged toward the only space that offered cover. A tall, broad-shouldered man, standing silently near one of the marble pillars. He was facing away from her, gazing out the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Lake Michigan. He wore a bespoke charcoal suit that hugged a physique carved from granite. Without thinking, Penelope reached out. Her soft, trembling fingers grabbed his large, calloused hand. The man stiffened instantly. The muscles in his arm coiled tighter than a steel spring, and for a terrifying second, Penelope thought he might physically strike her. He turned his head slowly, and she found herself staring into a pair of eyes so dark they looked like polished obsidian. His jawline was sharp, shadowed by a faint stubble, and a thin, jagged scar cut through his left eyebrow. He radiated an aura of absolute, terrifying authority. "Please," Penelope whispered, her voice barely audible over the jazz band. She squeezed his hand, stepping closer so her body was partially shielded by his massive frame. "Please, just for a minute. Pretend you know me. My ex-husband. He's right there. I just need him to walk past." The stranger looked down at her. His gaze was analytical, sweeping over her flushed cheeks, her wide, panicked green eyes, and the way her curves strained against the navy chiffon. He didn't look at her with pity, nor did he look at her with the familiar, dismissive judgment she was so used to receiving from men in Dominic's tax bracket. He looked at her like he was assessing a sudden, fascinating variable in a complex equation. "Your ex-husband," the man rumbled. His voice was a deep, gravelly baritone that sent a strange shiver down her spine. It carried a faint, unplaceable accent. "Yes," Penelope gasped, her eyes darting over his shoulder. Dominic was moving through the crowd, heading toward the bar. He was getting closer. "He's the man in the silver tie. Dominic Carter." A dangerous, imperceptible shift occurred in the stranger's demeanor. The coldness in his eyes flared into something sharp and predatory. Dominic Carter. Instead of pulling his hand away, the stranger suddenly shifted his stance. He stepped into Penelope's space, crowding her against the marble pillar in a move that was both protective and overwhelmingly dominant. He released her hand, only to slide his heavy arm around her thick waist, pulling her flush against his solid chest. The scent of him, expensive cedarwood, dark roasted coffee, and something metallic that smelled faintly like gunpowder, enveloped her senses. "If we are going to pretend, Kara," he murmured, his lips brushing the shell of her ear, causing her breath to hitch, "we need to be convincing. Look up at me and smile, unless you want him to know you are terrified." Penelope forced her head up, meeting his intense gaze. She tried to mold her trembling lips into a smile. "Thank you," she breathed. "I'm Penelope." "Arthur," the man replied smoothly, his thumb drawing a slow circle on her hip, burning a trail of heat through the fabric of her dress. "Arthur Costello." Penelope's mind blanked. The name sounded vaguely familiar, something she might have read in a local news article or heard whispered in the corporate accounting circles she frequented, but the adrenaline rushing through her veins made it impossible to place. Well, if it isn't Penny." The voice sliced through the air like a rusty blade. Penelope froze, the fake smile dying on her lips. Arthur did not release her. Instead, his grip on her waist tightened, a silent anchor in the storm. Penelope slowly turned her head. Dominic was standing 2 feet away, a cocktail glass in his hand, looking at her with a mixture of amusement and utter disdain. "I have to say, I'm shocked to see you here," Dominic sneered, his eyes raking over her body, lingering on her waist and hips with deliberate cruelty. "I didn't think this was an all-you-can-eat buffet event. Or did Sarah sneak you in through the kitchen?" The familiar sting of his words brought tears to the corners of Penelope's eyes. The old Penelope, the one who lived under his thumb, would have shrunk into herself, apologized, and ran away crying. But before Penelope could even open her mouth, Arthur Costello moved. Arthur didn't raise his voice. He didn't make a sudden, violent gesture. He simply turned his head, shifting his gaze from Penelope to Dominic. The temperature in the immediate vicinity seemed to plummet by 10 degrees. "You are interrupting," Arthur stated. It wasn't a complaint. It was a lethal observation. Dominic blinked, momentarily thrown off by the sheer physical presence of the man holding his ex-wife. He puffed out his chest, attempting to assert dominance in a game he had already lost. "Excuse me, I'm speaking to my ex-wife. I don't know who you are, pal, but you might want to watch your tone." Arthur's lips curved into a smile that did not reach his eyes. It was the smile of a wolf baring its teeth. "Pal," Arthur repeated softly, tasting the word like it was something rotten. He slowly removed his arm from Penelope's waist, stepping forward so he was toe-to-toe with Dominic. Despite Dominic being a reasonably tall man, Arthur towered over him. The difference in their statures was secondary to the difference in their natures. Dominic was a man who played with spreadsheets and corporate lawyers. Arthur looked like a man who buried problems in the desert. "My name is Arthur Costello," he said, his voice dropping an octave, meant only for Dominic's ears. "And you have precisely 3 seconds to apologize to the lady for your lack of manners, turn around, and walk out of this hotel. If you do not, I will have my associates drag you into the alley and teach you the respect your mother clearly failed to instill in you." Dominic's face drained of color. The arrogant smirk vanished, replaced by an expression of pure, unadulterated terror. The cocktail glass in his hand trembled. Penelope watched in absolute shock. Dominic, the man who had terrorized her for years, the man who controlled every room he walked into, looked as though he were about to wet himself. He swallowed hard, his eyes darting frantically to the 2 massive men in tailored suits who had seemingly materialized out of the shadows, standing just a few feet behind Arthur, their hands resting casually inside their suit jackets. I apologize," Dominic stammered, not looking at Penelope, his eyes fixed on Arthur's chest. "I didn't mean to offend." "You did offend," Arthur corrected softly. "But I will accept your retreat. Run along, Mr. Carter. We have unfinished business, you and I. We will discuss it soon." Dominic didn't wait for another word. He spun on his heel and power-walked toward the exit, practically shoving an elderly couple out of the way in his haste to escape. Penelope stood frozen, staring at the space where her ex-husband had just been utterly dismantled. A profound sense of relief washed over her, quickly followed by a sharp spike of confusion. "We have unfinished business, you and I." Arthur turned back to her, snapping his fingers once. The 2 massive bodyguards instantly melted back into the crowd. Arthur extended his arm toward her. "Walk with me, Penelope." It wasn't a request. Penelope hesitated, her accounting wired brain finally putting the pieces together. Arthur Costello, Costello Holdings, the infamous family that controlled half the shipping ports in Chicago, heavily rumored to be the modern face of the city's largest organized crime syndicate. They were practically untouchable, hiding behind legions of lawyers and legitimate shell companies. She had just used a Mafia Boss as a human shield. "Mr. Costello," Penelope stammered, taking a small step back. I appreciate what you just did. More than you know. But I really should go find my friend." Arthur stepped into her path, cutting off her escape route. Up close, the intensity in his dark eyes was paralyzing. "You sought my protection, Penelope. I provided it. But in my world, protection is never free." "I have money," she blurted out, her hands shaking as she gripped her small clutch purse. "I can pay you for your time. $1,000? 2? Arthur let out a low, humorless chuckle that vibrated in his chest. "I do not want your money, Penelope. I have plenty of my own. What I want is a conversation. Outside. In my car." "No," Penelope said, a sudden spark of defiance igniting in her chest. She had just spent 3 years letting a man dictate her actions. She wasn't about to get into a car with a mobster, no matter how magnetic or terrifying he was. "I'm not going anywhere with you." Arthur tilted his head, studying her with renewed interest. He noted the defiant jut of her chin, the way her full breasts heaved with rapid breaths, and the fierce intelligence shining in her eyes despite her fear. She was soft, plush, and utterly different from the starving, plastic women who usually threw themselves at him. She was real, and she was the key to a very expensive problem. "Allow me to clarify the situation, Miss Hayes," Arthur said smoothly, leaning in close so only she could hear him. "Your ex-husband, Dominic Carter, is a thief. He recently orchestrated a venture capital buyout that siphoned $5 million from one of my legitimate subsidiaries, Vanguard Holdings." Penelope gasped. Dominic was a scumbag, yes, but stealing from the mob? He was dead. "I have been looking for a way to quietly dismantle his life and recover my capital without drawing the attention of the federal government," Arthur continued, his eyes locked onto hers. And then, in a stroke of absolute serendipity, his brilliant forensic accountant ex-wife literally throws herself into my arms. "You know his accounts, Penelope. You know how he hides his money. You are going to help me find it." "I don't know anything about his current business," Penelope lied, her voice shaking. "We're divorced." "You are an exceptional liar, but your pulse is beating a frantic rhythm against your neck," Arthur observed, lifting his hand. He gently, almost reverently, brushed his knuckles against the soft skin of her throat. Penelope flinched, but the touch was surprisingly gentle, sending a jolt of electricity straight to her core. "Do not fight me on this, Penelope. You grabbed my hand. You invited me in. Now we are partners." He withdrew his hand and offered her his elbow. "My car is waiting. If you refuse, I will simply have my men pick up Dominic tonight. And when they are done making him scream, I will ensure the police find all the evidence pointing to his ex-wife, who had motive, means, and accounting expertise to ruin him." Penelope felt the blood drain from her face. He was trapping her, weaving a web so tight she couldn't breathe. She looked at his offered arm, then up at his unforgiving face. He had saved her from one monster, only to reveal himself as a much, much bigger predator. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Penelope slipped her hand through his arm. "Good girl," Arthur murmured, turning to lead her through the ballroom. "Welcome to the family, Penelope." Rain lashing against the tinted windows of the Maybach provided the only sound as the luxury vehicle glided seamlessly down Lakeshore Drive. Penelope sat rigidly against the plush cream leather, her navy chiffon dress pooling around her, feeling entirely out of her depth. Across from her, Arthur poured a measure of amber liquid from a crystal decanter, the ambient city lights casting sharp, shifting shadows across his scarred brow. He handed her a lowball glass. "Drink. It will settle your nerves." Penelope took it, her fingers brushing his. The heat of his skin was a stark contrast to the chilled glass. She took a sip of the Macallan, coughing slightly as the burn slid down her throat. "Where are we going?" "My residence at the St. Regis," Arthur replied smoothly, pulling out a sleek tablet. "It is the most secure location to access the financial networks you will need. My technical team has already prepared a terminal." Penelope's stomach twisted. "You are expecting me to hack into Dominic's accounts tonight? Just like that?" "Mr. Costello, I am an auditor, not a cyber-terrorist." "Arthur," he corrected, his dark eyes rising to meet hers. "And you will not need to hack anything. You know his passwords, his security question answers, his behavioral patterns. You know exactly how he structures his shell companies. You built his initial portfolio when you were married, did you not?" She swallowed hard, looking away. "Yes, before I realized what he was doing with it. I realized what he'd do." "Then you are simply performing routine maintenance," Arthur said, the ghost of a smirk playing on his lips. Consider it your final act as his wife. Taking out the trash. 20 minutes later, Penelope was escorted into a sprawling, multi-million-dollar penthouse that overlooked the Chicago River. The space was an intimidating blend of dark marble, velvet, and floor-to-ceiling glass. In the center of the massive study sat a state-of-the-art multi-monitor workstation. For the next 3 hours, Penelope lost herself in the numbers. Stripping off her uncomfortable heels, she curled her thick legs beneath her on the ergonomic leather chair, her fingers flying across the keyboard. The anxiety of the ballroom faded, replaced by the cold, comforting logic of ledgers, wire transfers, and offshore routing numbers. She tracked the missing $5 million through a labyrinth of dummy corporations, slicing through Dominic's sloppy attempts at encryption. Arthur sat quietly on a nearby sofa, reviewing documents. But Penelope could feel the heavy weight of his gaze constantly returning to her. He didn't look at her with the familiar, suffocating judgment Dominic used. Arthur watched her the way a man watches a mesmerizing fire. "You are working too hard." Pause. Arthur's voice broke the silence. Penelope blinked, realizing the ambient lighting in the penthouse had dimmed. Arthur walked over, carrying a silver tray laden with food from Gibson's Bar and Steakhouse, a massive bone-in ribeye, thick wedges of roasted potatoes, and a decadent slice of macadamia turtle pie. Penelope's breath hitched. Her instinct, beaten into her by years of Dominic's psychological warfare, flared up immediately. "Oh no, I shouldn't. It's too late for carbs. Dominic always said eating past 8 was a sign of lack of discipline for someone my size." A terrifying darkness clouded Arthur's face. He set the tray down on the desk with a heavy thud. He leaned over her, planting his large hands on the armrests of her chair, trapping her. "Do not ever," Arthur growled, his voice a lethal, silken thread. "Quote that pathetic excuse for a man in my presence again. You are not a porcelain doll meant to starve for a weak man's vanity. You are a woman. You are brilliant. You are soft, and you are perfect exactly as you are. Now you will eat, Penelope, because I require my partner to have her strength." Tears pricked Penelope's eyes, not from fear, but from a profound, shattering sense of validation. She tentatively picked up the fork. The food was incredible, and as she ate, a heavy, warm silence settled between them. Arthur simply watched, a possessive satisfaction radiating from his broad frame. Wiping her mouth with a linen napkin, Penelope turned back to the screens. "I found it," she announced softly, her professional tone returning. "But Arthur, there is a massive problem." Arthur stepped behind her chair, his chest brushing her shoulders. "Show me." The $5 million he stole from Vanguard Holdings didn't stay in his Cayman accounts. Penelope pointed to a highlighted ledger line on the screen. He used it as leverage. He transferred it into a holding company called Ironclad Logistics. Arthur's posture went entirely rigid. The air in the room suddenly felt like it was made of lead. Ironclad. That is a front for the Kavanaugh Syndicate. The Irish. Penelope nodded, her heart hammering. "He didn't just steal from you to get rich, Arthur. He stole from you to buy his way into the Kavanaugh family's protection. But he hasn't fully cleared the funds yet. They are sitting in a digital escrow account. I need the physical decryption key to access it and wire it back to you. The digital token is on a hard drive." "Where is it?" Arthur demanded, his voice devoid of all warmth, replaced by the chilling calculation of a mob boss preparing for war. "In his private safety deposit box at the Chase Bank branch on Dearborn Street," Penelope whispered. "I still have my duplicate key." but I have to go in person. Monday morning brought a suffocating humidity to downtown Chicago. Penelope stood on the sidewalk outside the towering stone facade of the Chase Bank, adjusting the collar of her beige trench coat. Her heart beat a frantic rhythm against her ribs. "Breathe, Kara," Arthur murmured through the discreet earpiece hidden beneath her thick, dark curls. He was parked in a black SUV half a block away, watching her through the tinted glass. 3 of his best men were scattered around the plaza, disguised as ordinary businessmen and couriers. "You are doing perfectly. Walk in, retrieve the drive, and walk out. We control the board." Penelope nodded slightly, forcing herself to walk through the heavy revolving doors. The bank was quiet. She bypassed the tellers and approached the vault manager, presenting her ID and the sleek metal key. Within minutes, she was alone in a private viewing room, staring at the silver flash drive in the palm of her trembling hand. This was it. The key to $5 million. The key to Dominic's ruin. She slipped the drive into her pocket, gathered her purse, and exited the vault. "Penny." The voice hit her like a physical blow. Penelope froze in the middle of the bank lobby. Dominic stepped out from behind a marble pillar. He looked entirely unhinged. His designer suit was wrinkled, his tie was loose, and dark circles bruised the skin under his bloodshot eyes. Flanking him were 2 men who did not look like corporate lawyers. They wore cheap leather jackets and had the cold, dead-eyed stares of Kavanaugh muscle. "Did you really think you could lock me out of my own servers?" Dominic hissed, advancing on her. "I got an alert the second you tried to bypass the escrow ping. Hand over the drive, Penelope. Now!" "Arthur," Penelope whispered frantically, taking a step back. Dominic laughed, a harsh, grating sound. "Your new boyfriend? He's not here, Penny. It's just you and me. Give me the drive, or my friends here are going to make a very messy scene." Before Penelope could even react, the heavy glass doors of the bank shattered inward. A deafening alarm blared through the lobby as Arthur Costello walked through the ruined entrance, accompanied by 6 men wielding suppressed submachine guns. The atmosphere in the room shifted from a tense standoff to an absolute, terrifying display of overwhelming force. Arthur did not run. He stalked forward with the terrifying grace of an apex predator. The 2 Kavanaugh thugs immediately reached for their waistbands, but Arthur's men had their weapons raised and aimed before the Irishmen could even unholster their guns. "Hands away from the weapons," Arthur commanded, his voice echoing off the marble walls, colder than the Chicago wind. "Or I will paint the ceiling with your brains." The thugs froze, slowly raising their hands. Dominic, completely paralyzed by terror, backed away until his spine hit the teller counter. Arthur didn't even look at the thugs. His obsidian eyes were locked entirely on Dominic. He walked right past Penelope, stepping between her and her ex-husband, an impenetrable wall of bespoke wool and lethal intent. "I warned you at the gala, Dominic," Arthur said softly, reaching out and grabbing Dominic by the throat. He lifted the venture capitalist a full 2 inches off the marble floor. Dominic gasped, his hands clawing uselessly at Arthur's thick wrist. "You stole from my family. You tried to sell my money to the Irish. But your greatest sin was threatening what is mine." Arthur dropped him. Dominic collapsed onto the floor, coughing violently, tears streaming down his face. "Penelope," Arthur said, not taking his eyes off the pathetic man on the floor. "Do it." Penelope reached into her trench coat and pulled out the sleek tablet Arthur had given her. She plugged the silver flash drive into the port. The screen lit up, prompting her for the final execution command. She looked down at Dominic, the man who had mocked her weight, broken her spirit, and made her feel utterly worthless. She felt no pity, only liberation. With a firm, unwavering finger, Penelope hit execute. "Transfer complete," she said, her voice ringing out clear and strong. $5 million has been returned to Vanguard Holdings. Dominic Carter's accounts are entirely liquidated. Dominic let out a pathetic wail. Without the money, the Kavanaughs would kill him before the sun set. He was a dead man. Arthur turned, stepping away from the trash on the floor. He walked over to Penelope, wrapping his large, warm hand around the nape of her neck, pulling her flush against his chest. He didn't care about the security cameras or the terrified bank staff. He lowered his head and captured her lips in a bruising, possessive kiss that claimed every inch of her soul. Penelope melted into him, wrapping her arms around his broad shoulders. She had reached out to a stranger to hide in the shadows, but instead she had found a king who dragged her into the light. "Let's go home, Mia Regina," Arthur murmured against her lips. Penelope smiled, clutching the tablet. She wasn't just a forensic accountant anymore. She was the Mafia's greatest asset, and she had never felt more powerful. Did Penelope's ultimate revenge on her toxic ex leave you breathless? If you loved this intense Mafia romance story, full of thrilling twists, power dynamics, and a fierce heroine who finally reclaims her worth, hit that like button right now. Don't forget to share this video with your friends who love spicy drama, and subscribe to our channel for more addictive, jaw-dropping stories every single week. Drop a comment below. Would you have grabbed Arthur's hand? See you next time.